Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today I'll talk about the build I'll be starting for Diablo 4, which is going to be a Lash Sorcerer. Now, when I initially played the beta, I wanted to play Sorcerer immediately, and I kind of liked it, but I was also not really sure how it's going to go into endgame. Two things that I was looking at immediately, though, was certain enchantments that kind of reminded me of Cast on Crit in PoE. And these basically proc spells from your attacks or spells. And that's a place that I really like, so I thought it would be cool to make something out of it. But I couldn't really try it in the beta, only until level 25. And I was like, it's probably just a meme, just a gimmick. But here comes Northwar with his new build guide. The footage in the background is made by him. So if you want his total thoughts, he made a full max roll guide. I'll link it down in the description. In this video, I'll kind of give you an overview of why I chose this build, why I think this build will perform extremely well, especially as a starter with none to very little gear. So yeah, whether this is going to be the best Sorc build or not, it looks incredibly fun. It has good AoE, very good defenses, because you don't need that much on your bar. You can mostly fill it with defensive skills. It has good single target, just the whole deal. Also, I'll be streaming my first week over on twitch.tv/Palsteron. So if you want to check that out, play alongside me, or just hang out with like-minded people, that's the place to go. Now, first, I want to kind of explain why I chose this build and why I think it's going to be incredible for a starter. Other than just the insane damage and the great survivability, it also seems like it doesn't use much mana. You won't go out of mana all that much, which was definitely a problem in beta for me. While some other classes have ways to cheese their resources with certain abilities, it didn't really seem to be the case for Sorcerer unless you were playing very specific builds, so that's already a big plus for me. Also, a thing I hate for first builds in whatever ARPG is RNG, kind of being susceptible to hoping you drop a certain legendary. This doesn't need any legendary aspect, and some of the strongest aspects are actually on the codex, so you can get them kind of for free. And on top of that, you're also quite mobile. You have arguably the best movement skill in the game with teleport, and you can be quite fast on top. And for whatever that's worth, this is kind of going to be the D4's version of a cast on crit build, which is a playstyle I really like. All right, so first up, let's talk about how the build actually works. The two enchantments that we're going to proc with the Arc Slash is going to be Meteor, which has a unlucky hit at 8% chance to fall on enemies. And then you also have your main damage dealer, which is going to be Ball Lightning, and that has unlucky hit at 25% chance to proc. So this already establishes that we want to scale a ton of lucky hit. And then on top of that, we also want to scale crit, which we would want to do anyways for damage, but it's also necessary to actually proc your stuff. Now, these enchantments get procced by a lot of things. We're going to go through all of them, but the main thing starts at level 1, which is Arc Lash. This is basically a main skill that costs no resources, and it has a lucky hit chance of 30%, which already makes it really interesting, but it also has a hidden 1.25 attack speed multiplier. Now, also, whenever you critically strike, you will actually swipe another time, which means double damage and also extra procs. And we also have Glinting Arc Lash. This will have big implications down the line where you can reduce especially your defensive cooldowns by quite a bit. Now, in the endgame version, as you can see, we're not really taking anything here. Charged bolts we're never casting. This is also something that will get procced. More on that later. But then we get into one of the most important things for Sorc, its defensive cooldowns. The first one being Flame Shield, which straight up makes you immune for 2 seconds. It does have a 20-second cooldown, but you're going to reduce that by a lot with gear and also, for example, Arc Lash, but also some other things that we're going to talk about down the road. You also get 25% movement speed, making it easier to get out of bad situations, kind of making you able to reposition, because you're probably only going to use this as a sort of like an oh shit button. And it also heals you for some of your life. Now, the second defensive option that you're going to use, which you're actually going to get from Amulet, you don't have to spec into this, is going to be Ice Armor. This is basically going to absorb a certain amount of the damage that you take. You don't need to take any points into this. You're just going to get an Amulet with +1. But I'll just want to show it right here. Then we have one of the biggest ones in general, which is Frost Nova. Not only is this defensive, but it's also offensive. It obviously has a huge cooldown. It freezes enemies in place, which is absurdly strong. But the big thing about this here is also that you make enemies vulnerable for up to 6 seconds against bosses. Vulnerable is basically a huge damage multiplier, and Sorc has quite a hard time applying it usually. But with how much cooldown recovery we're going to have, this is going to be up quite a bit whenever you need it. We're going to go over the small nodes in a second. We'll go over the skills first. Then we have Meteor. Now, Meteor is incredible for a few reasons, not only for its damage. The damage is kind of secondary. Don't get me wrong, it has nice damage, it has decent AoE, it procs multiple times, right? If you hit 3 or more enemies, that's all cool. But the main thing is you want to apply Burning, and then also with this here, you want to apply Immobilized. Down the road, we're going to have a lot of increased damage and also damage multipliers, which want you to immobilize, stun, burn enemies. So this is basically a package for that. The main damage dealer, though, is going to be a 5 out of 5. We're going to invest into this as much as we can, which is going to be Ball Lightning. On first glance, this doesn't seem that great, 25% base damage, but it hits quite a bit. From Northwar's testing, he talks about this hitting 3.33 times normally. You then also get the Enhanced Ball Lightning, which means that it scales with attack speed, which can then get it to a whopping 10 hits per second. And while the procced Ball Lightnings cannot proc itself, it definitely can proc more meteors. After moving on from this, we have one of the most important skills in the game, which is going to be your ultimate Unstable Currents. Now, the skill sounds kind of goofy, right? It has a huge cooldown that you can obviously reduce with cooldown recovery in endgame. It's going to get better and better and more reliable the longer you go. But it's there for 10 seconds, and it makes it so whenever you cast a shock skill, you're gonna cast another Mastery, Core, or Conjuration skill. And those, once again, include Ball Lightning, Meteor, which you're already spec'd into, but it also includes these right here. And they're mostly quite strong. And since you proc so often, whenever you have this up, you're going to see a lot of damage numbers and a ton of burst damage. But this skill is also the reason why we take the Charged Bolts right here. So Charged Bolts, on first glance, is not that special, right? Okay, it hits a lot, it's nice AoE, but we take it just for the destructive Charged Bolts. Whenever you hit an enemy with this, enemy damage gets reduced by 20%. And these nodes actually work with procced stuff. So yeah, whenever it is inevitably going to proc Charge Bolts, which is going to happen with how often you hit, even though you have a ton of skills, then the enemy damage gets reduced for 20%. And when it comes to damage reduction multipliers, especially on Sorc, I would say take them almost every time. Barb and Druid can get away with maybe sometimes preferring damage over a certain multiplier because they have Fortify and a lot of defensive tools. For Sorc, other than cooldowns, you don't have as much, so you want to prioritize that quite a bit. You don't want to just simply die whenever your cooldowns aren't up. Now, while Unstable Currents is up, your attack speed also gets increased by 25%. And don't forget that also means that you're going to get a lot of Ball Lightning procs on top of everything else. And then you also have this right here. You're going to get a lot of crackling energy continually while Unstable Currents is up. And as for ultimate skill, early, you really want Veer's Mastery. Now, I just talked about how you want to take all the less multipliers. But when it comes to Veer's, once you get into endgame, you will want to go for Overflowing Energy. This makes it so crackling energy hits more enemies, which means better clear, better cooldown recovery. So as you can see here, whenever crackling energy hits an enemy, your shock skills cooldowns are reduced by 0.1 seconds. This doesn't sound like much. It goes up to 0.25. Doesn't sound like much, but with how much you proc, if you look at the damage numbers in the intro, every one of those will reduce the cooldown. And the more Unstable Currents you can have up, the more you're going to trigger it again, and the more Unstable Currents you have up again. But for this one, you definitely already need a lot of critical strike chance, lucky hit chance, attack speed. So this is going to be something for endgame. Veer's is incredibly strong early. As for small passives, right here, we take 3 out of 3 Glass Cannon. Since we have a lot of defensive tools, we're going to take this for the extra damage multiplier right here. And we're also going to take Elemental Attunement. You only need 1 point in this for the extra CDR. We have so many procs that there's just no reason to put more than 1 point into this. If we zoom out, we can also see that we obviously take the lucky hit chance, so we have more procs. We also take the Align the Elements, 1% damage reduction against the leads for each second. Now, I probably want to, at some point, maybe get more into this to make it a little bit more consistent, maybe get 2 or even 3 points into it. I'm not exactly sure. And then also we have Protection. They might be a little bit confused about Conjuration Mastery because we're neither using Hydra nor Ice Blades nor Lightning Spear. But the thing is, we're going to have all 3 of those up whenever we proc them when we have Unstable Currents up. So whenever we have this up, we're just going to proc like crazy, and there's going to be at least one of these up, which means this 9% increased damage, because we have 3 of them, is going to be global. Now, we also take Inner Flames. I would like to get more points into this, but it's just really hard to fit in. Then we get Devouring Place, which is where we want to go. It's actually pretty rough, as far as I know, to get crit damage on Sorc, so this is a huge increase. And once again, we see right here, Burning Immobilized means that you get an extra 75% critical strike damage. And as I understand this, this is actually a critical damage multiplier. So I don't know if that's actually true, but it should be a multiplier for your critical strike damage, which is already a multiplier, which makes it even stronger. Once again, Meteor and Wizard's Meteor is a big reason to take for the Burning and Immobilized, but we're also going to talk about that a little bit later. And we're going to round it out here with Cursing Currents into Electrocution, which is another source of less damage taken. And when we talk about items, there's free stats you want to prioritize. There's cooldown reduction, which is offensive, defensive. It is the premium stat and the #1 stat you want to have wherever you can get it. And then on top of that, you also want to get crit chance and lucky hit chance. Both of these will provide you with more procs and more damage. Now, critical damage is obviously also a thing, but if you don't have the crit chance, not only are you not going to activate that multiplier anyways, you're also not going to get as much ball lightning procs. So keep that in mind. But when we talk about legendary aspects, there's obviously stuff that's in the codex and stuff that isn't in the codex. If you want to go in detail, Northwar has a great list down here. We're going to go over some of the things you want from your legendary aspects. Now, the single most ridiculous legendary affix you want is the 60% more damage to immobilized, stunned, or frozen enemies. Now, this is a roll. It goes from 30 to 45. You can actually get this one on the codex, and you want to get it. As you can see here, you can get it from Sunken Library in Kyrgyzstan. The important thing to note here is not only is this one multiplier, this is actually 3. We're immobilizing, stunning, and freezing, and something I didn't know is this is actually 3 separate multipliers. And this is a big reason why we also want to proc the meteor as often as possible, so enemies are immobilized as much as possible, so you get another extra multiplier. Stun you get from a lot of sources, especially your Arcing Lash, and freeze you will get from your Frost Nova. Also, if you didn't know, whatever power is on your amulet gets a 1.5 multiplier. So usually this would be 30 to 45, but the 45 goes to 60 if you have it on your amulet. So that's really, really strong. If you had a two-hander, that's a ×2 multiplier, but in this case, we don't choose to go for one. Also, amulets usually don't change that much while leveling, so it is a good idea to put your most important aspect on your amulet if you can, because it's mostly going to be CDR +2 levels. It's not going to be something you have to upgrade that often, like, for example, your gear for extra armor or your weapon for extra damage. Now, another really important thing you want is also on the codex, and that is the basic skills gain attack speed. Usually this is 15 if you get it from the codex, but you can get up to 30%. This is going to make your arc lash a lot faster, so more procs, more damage. Now, there's a ton of other legendary aspects that either make you more tanky, give you extra damage, right? Stuff like that. But at the end of the day, some of these you're going to get in the codex, like the increased armor right here. Some of them you'll have to farm up, like the extra attack speed from core skills. But a big selling point of this build is, other than maybe this affix, which is ridiculous, that you can farm. You don't need to get the legendary. You can target farm. There's not really anything required to make the build work. And when it comes to unique items, I'm actually not that well versed. I'll have to kind of explore the game. I kind of want to see them for myself. If you find one of these, they're obviously GG. Harlequin Crest is completely ridiculous. It's basically the Shaco of this game. It gives you a ton of extra life, CDR, all stats, plus ranks, everything you want. How rare some of these are, I have no idea. Azu's Heirloom is kind of interesting. Gives you a ton of increased attack speed. It gives you movement speed, shrine buff duration, I guess. One important thing to note about this one as well is, even though the movement speed cap is 100%, if you have more than 100%, it still increases the critical strike chance you get from these boots. And then something that sounds really fun is Raiment of the Infinite, which gives you, basically whenever you teleport, everything around you is kind of pulled in, which sounds really good for this build because it's going to make Meteor hit a lot more, which then double procs, and your Arc Lash, which has not the greatest AoE, is going to hit a lot more targets, so more procs. This seems completely ridiculous as well. And when we talk about the Paragon board, I'll be honest here, this is not something that I can just min-max before I've actually played the game to the extent that some of the people behind the scenes have. I definitely want to further dive into that before I put my own stamp onto this. For now, Northwar has given a really nice outline, so we'll definitely follow that. If you don't know anything about Paragon boards in general, I'll link a sort of tutorial down in the description so you can kind of check it out. But this is basically Diablo 4's endgame system. You can customize your character with small stats, bigger stats, right? Like here. And there's also glyphs, which are sort of like jewel sockets in PoE. And these are itemized in game. You can find them from these endgame dungeons, and you can also upgrade them there. I'm going to talk about these a little bit. But in general, I'm pretty sure this is going to take some time to really figure out what the best thing is. I have no idea, just looking over the setup here, if it's going to be the GG. But I'm pretty sure it's going to be something that will be kind of figured out over time. On first glance, he doesn't really use any legendary nodes right here. The only legendary node that I would possibly use that might be interesting for later is Frigid Fate right here. It gives you extra lucky hit chance up to 15%, which is a plus. So not just, it's incredible, right? Now, this does have a few conditions, but because you hit with so many cold skills as well from the Surge, I think this could be something interesting. But other than that, I would just literally follow this. Talking about glyphs, though, these are quite interesting. You basically socket them in, and then If a certain condition is met in the radius, you get extra bonuses, and you also get bonuses according to how many of the stats you have in the radius. So if we go down here, for example, Territorial says for every 5 dexterity within range, you get increased damage to close targets. And then there's also an additional bonus once you hit the breakpoint of 25, which gives you damage reduction. Now, Glyphs in D4 seem pretty straightforward right now. There's not that much to it. I guess one thing I want to point out is stuff like giving increased area seems super rare in this game. And for example, here, Mastery Skills have 20% increased area. Mastery Skills are literally Ball, Lightning, and Meteor, the main skills that you're using. So this would be something you want to get ASAP. So it's not going to be like in PoE where you're actually going to not take certain AoE needs. I think whenever you have this rare occasion where you can actually take it, you want it. As for leveling, I did actually test quite a bit in the beta, but it didn't really matter in the end because they ended up nerfing everything I did. So just going to follow what's recommended here. The first thing is, at first, you're not going to have enough lucky hit or crit at all to do anything with these, so you want to focus more on other raw damage methods before you become the cast on crit build, so to say. And you're going to take Fireball Enchantment, which is incredible in general. Whenever you kill an enemy, they explode. It's like exploding in PoE, for example. And you have the Arc Lash Enchantment, which really helps with cooldown uptime. And by the way, this build also has its own leveling guide, so I will also link that down in the description, obviously. Now, when it comes to skill progression, we can look at this real quick. You're going to, as always, start out with Arc Lash. Charge Bolts is kind of going to be your clear, while Arc Lash is going to be a little bit more focused on single target. TP, Ice Armor, Frost Nova. Like I said, once you have a +1 on your amulet, you're not going to have to actually take the Ice Armor anymore, so that's nice. At first, you don't really have to pump that many points into Frost Nova. It's just there to be like a one use. You're not going to be able to keep the cooldown up anyways, so who cares? Hydra is just basically free damage while leveling, so there's not much reason not to take it. Even after it got nerfed, it still does quite a lot of damage. And since we don't really have any other mana spenders, you can just throw down as many Hydras as possible, and while your mana goes up, you just Arc Lash all the time, which doesn't cost any resources. After that, he gets the Static Discharge for the Shocking Impact, which just gives you extra lightning damage. You're going to stun quite a bit with the Arc Lash. And as you can see here, we also maxed out Arc Lash right now. Now, Unstable Currents is going to be where this build is going to completely pop off, especially on single target. It does incredible damage, even at cooldown 70. One thing that will change probably is in endgame, you can spam it a lot more whenever it's up, but in early game, you won't have enough cooldown recovery, so you kind of have to think about when you want to use it. You want to have it up whenever there's a really chunky elite or the boss. And as I said at the start, you want to go with Veers until you get enough lucky hit chance to actually proc the other mastery, and then we kind of just put some extra points into, for example, Teleport to give it less cooldown. Now, the 3 most important legendary affixes you want to get early are all basically from the Codex, and they're going to be from Buried Halls, Sunken Library, and Dark Ravine. If you didn't know, if you actually go to the Codex and you click on the power, it's going to kind of lead you there. It's going to guide you there, which is kind of cool on the minimap. You want to get the offensive aspect of control. We already talked about this. It's insane. You want to get the extra attack speed. It's going to make the build feel a lot better, and it's going to give you a lot more procs. And you also want to get the extra damage reduction. And for stat priorities, this is still true. This is something you have to work towards. Get the cooldown reduction, get the crit chance, get the lucky hit chance. And once you feel like you have enough, you're going to respec your enhancement into the procs that we talked about earlier for Ball Lightning and Meteor. As far as I know, I don't think you pay anything to change them, so I think you can just try it out as needed. Yeah, that's basically it for the video. I hope you could learn a thing or two about this. Definitely check out Northwar's full guide. He has a lot of insights here that I couldn't cram into a video. I'll link both his endgame and his leveling guide down in the description. As well as that, follow his Twitch. He seems like a really knowledgeable person, so that's definitely something where you can learn from. At the end here, I want to say that I'm really happy that this build exists. I wasn't really sure what to play. I was kind of pondering between Rogue, Sork. I didn't really see a build that I really liked. I didn't want to go Whirlwind like everybody else. But yeah, as for that, I'm probably going to make a few videos about Diablo, depending on how much interesting things I have to say. I'll definitely make update videos for this, at least 1 or 2, because I'm assuming there's going to be new stuff that I'm going to learn about, especially the Paragon board. And yeah, I hope you guys have a great start, whether you play this, whether you play something else, maybe you learned a little bit from the video. Whatever. But since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.